Sup, ladies and gentlemen, Akalon here, and welcome back to each and every one of you. And of course, if you are new to the channel, thank you so much for joining us. I am very happy to have you here. In today's video, of course, very exciting stuff. We have Ian Hazzikostas, the man himself, talking about Shadowlands and what we can expect from the launch of Shadowlands. So I did cover this during the live stream, and it was about an hour worth of covering and discussion and shit like that. In this video, I'm going to try to boil it down to the most important things that was sort of discussed and revealed within that interview, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you want to see me reacting live to most of this stuff and just have conversations live about the lore and about Shadowlands and about World of Warcraft and all that, you can join me over on Twitch. The link is in the description down below, or every Sunday right here on YouTube. Now, please remember, if you do enjoy the content that I put out, to smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, as it does help out the channel a ton. For some reason, YouTube thinks that is an important thing. So smash that like button, but most importantly, enjoy the video. So the first question that was asked here was about covenants and really the nuance and the ins and outs of covenant balance and how Blizzard is going to approach it. Ian in this said they're going to be very conservative, especially during patches. So what they will do is at the end of every single patch, they'll evaluate all of the classes and their covenants, and they'll see, right, maybe we mix things up here. Maybe we throw this in there, we buff this. So they'll be more aggressive going from patch to patch. But during a patch, once you've decided this is the covenant I'm going to play, that's when they'll be extremely conservative. If the Kyrians is at the top for your class, you can expect that the Kyrians will remain at the top for your class at least for the whole patch cycle before you go to the next patch cycle, and maybe things might shift around, things might change. So personally, as I've said before, this is a system that at its core creates more problems than what it actually solves. And I do apologize for anyone that has a different opinion, and you're welcome to that opinion. The issue for me, as always, as I've said before, is whenever you do something, you have to ask yourself, what is the pros and the cons of the system that I'm trying to invent, or the system that I'm trying to implement? If the cons outweigh the potential pros, so just the potential cons outweigh the potential the pros, should you then really go ahead and implement this system? Because I can see everything going wrong with this system and really ruining the experience for players. But even if everything goes right, it's still not an optimal system. So that's really my biggest problem. Even if everything works out amazing with the covenants, it's still not an optimal system. There's better ways of doing this. But if everything goes wrong, or even if 50% of the things that could go wrong do go wrong, it's going to ruin the game for a hell of a lot of people. So it's nice that they understand that they need to be extremely conservative when it comes to balancing options, because players would have had to spend time leveling up their covenant. They're going to collect soul binds, they're going to collect soul conduits. All of these things is time invested. If you all of a sudden change it so that the covenant that they're in now is complete dog shit versus the covenant that they need to go to now, you've effectively wasted months of that player's time spent. Now, on that, I do want to make one thing clear, and that is, you guys remember how Blizzard said this needs to be a meaningful choice that has meaningful consequences, and you need to feel like this is a weighty choice. Well, Blizzard have fucked that out the window. There's nothing weighty about this choice at all. In fact, swapping covenants, so leaving the Kyrians and going to the Necrolords, it's going to take you between 3 and 4 days to catch up to a point where you're really on par. You're doing all of the damage that you could potentially be doing. There really is no downsides to you having swapped from the Kyrians to the Necrolords, and then within about 2 weeks, it will be as if you've never left. So in about 2 weeks of doing just normal stuff within the Covenant, you'll be on par with the level that you were when you left the Kyrians. So it will be as if you never left. This is a great thing, but as I said, this is to potentially combat the extreme downsides that this system will have, and effectively it's turned into what meaningful choice where. Next question was about drums and scrolls and the nerfing of these and why exactly that's important. And of course, we heard this multiple times, class identity, class identity. This is really the focus for Blizzard going into the Shadowlands. The problem is, of course, that the covenants that they've designed really doesn't work with class identity. It is a spec identity system because you have different specs that have different covenants that is their base covenants. It's a complete fucking joke to say class identity, but then you design the core system of the expansion is designed around the specs and not around the classes. I don't get double entendre, I guess is what it is, if that is even the right word. I don't know. Fuck it. But for those of you that don't know, the drums and the scrolls and things like that, it's been nerfed into the fucking ground. It's no longer useful. And Ian's answer here is, in my opinion, a beacon of why World of Warcraft is the shit show that it is right now. And I don't wish to take away from the glory that is Shadowlands. It's an amazing expansion. I'm gonna love playing it. You're gonna love playing it. But there is some serious problems within the design philosophies that World of Warcraft follow. And this is a great example of that. Blizzard made the change because they want players to feel like they matter. They want a mage to feel like they matter because they have bloodlust and they can't be replaced by a simple item. The problem is, and I've said this before, Blizzard seems to continuously design the game for what they want players to do, not for what players are actually doing. And this is the biggest issue. No player, Ian uses this example in his answer, where, you know, if you have a priest, you should be happy that you're going to get extra health. And yes, you don't have the bloodlust, but at least you have extra health and this is going to allow you to do all sorts of other things. Ian, what? How about the priest is just not going to get a fucking group because he doesn't have bloodlust and they can't take drums to make up for the fact that he doesn't have bloodlust? That's what's going to happen. It's not going to all of a sudden be, oh, at least we've got extra health. No, we don't have bloodlust. We're not going to take the priest. We want bloodlust. That's what's going to happen because it is an online game and people are ultimately going to take the shortcuts that they take. Your job as developers is to design based on what players are doing, not based on what you think players should be doing. But of course, I could be wrong. You can let me know in the comment section down below. That is just my opinion. The next question was about the revolving door philosophy. Now, that is not a philosophy that if you're only a World of Warcraft player, you should have any sort of experience with. But if you've ever played anything else, you will at least understand what the revolving door balancing philosophy is. It's something that League of Legends, Dota, and games like that follow very closely. They have too many champions to balance every single patch. So instead, what they do is they pick, 10 or 20 or 30 characters or heroes, and then they buff and balance those. So the game is balanced around about 20 or 30 characters, and the rest of them really isn't balanced. And this was the question that they asked here, and Ian had an amazing answer to it. They decided not to do it, but here I want to pose a philosophical question, if you will. I'm not saying this is the right answer. In fact, I don't know what the right answer would be. I'm just asking a question here. Wouldn't it be better if Blizzard chose a single spec for a single class every single patch and balanced the patch and balanced the spec around the patch? So every single class has a viable spec in a given patch. And then, of course, for hybrid specs where you have a healer and a DPS, there you would have to balance all of the specs in order to work. For priests, for example, you could say, well, this patch we're really going to balance Holy. We're not going to balance Disc because last patch, Disc was the balanced one and Holy wasn't. I'm not saying this is the answer. Personally, I wish that we lived in a world where Blizzard could potentially balance all of the classes and all of the specs, but that's 37 specs, by the way. I think it's 37, it could be 36, but I think it's 37 specs. 37 specs is mathematically impossible to balance. There is too many spells, too many nuance and variance that goes into it. At the end of the day, what you end up with if you try to balance 37 specs is none of them end up being balanced at all, and you have outliers that is just completely destructive because they're slipping through the cracks. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you guys think? Should this be something that Blizzard looks into? Can you see some obvious downsides? I'm not convinced that I see obvious downsides, but I can be convinced because I'm not a developer. I'm just asking something that I think would be very interesting to look into. Alright, so next up they started talking about legendaries. The first and foremost was legendary catch-up mechanics. And in this, as Ian stated, there is none. They thought that, you know, because you can only wear a single legendary, it makes sense, right? Once you've spent those four weeks really building your first legendary, you're on par with everyone else. So the only difference would be is you don't have a second legendary to swap into based on the fight that you're doing, but at least based on your first legendary, you're on par with everyone else. So there is no catch-up mechanics there. Then they asked about the drop rate of legendaries, because remember, we actually have to collect the different legendary memories, if you will, and then take those to the rune carver so that we can learn how to apply this to a given armor piece. And here the answer is a little bit more nuanced. It really depends on the source. So if, for example, it is a world boss that you can only do once a week, or maybe it's on a rotation weekly, so you don't even get to see it every single week, maybe once every 4 weeks, that's going to be 100% drop chance. So if you do that boss, you kill it, you're going to get it for 100%. If it's something that drops from a dungeon that can be repeated and can be spammed, there's not going to be a guaranteed drop on that. You just have to keep doing it. They did ask about bad luck protection for legendary effects, and in this, Ian basically said he doesn't recall, but he doesn't think that will happen. And I think there's two sort of ways to look at this. Hopefully this isn't an extremely rare thing. So in other words, where it is on the loot table, it doesn't have like a 1% drop chance or a 0.8% drop chance. Hopefully that drop chance is somewhere around 10% or 15%, in which case bad luck protection really wouldn't be required, because you're gonna get it. At some point it is going to drop, and it's probably gonna drop sooner rather than later. But there is a world with a lower drop chance that you can say, well, this is mathematically will just never drop for anyone, right? Or some people will just never get it. So there is a world where I could see that happen, and hopefully there is some sort of back system to apply bad luck protection in case it is required. But right now, there is no bad luck protection in acquisition of legendaries. Next question they had really was about the conduit system, and they sort of asked about the ranks. So those of you that hasn't been on the channel before, or maybe hasn't followed World of Warcraft news, you might not know about the ranking system within these conduits. It has been confirmed now that that is a back-end thing. We as the player will never care about the conduit rank. The rank isn't known to us. We just see it as an item level thing. And Ian in this sort of explained, it isn't random except for the one that Venari drops. So Venari has this thing that you can purchase with Stygia that gives you a random conduit that you do not yet own. And in this, the way that would function is effectively, if you have, say, an average item level of your conduits of 226, then the one that Venari gives you that you open that is a mystery one, that will also be a 226. If your average conduit level is 180 item level, then she's going to give you a 180 item level. So really, it is based on the averages that you have. As for all others, that really is based around the level of difficulty of the content that you do. So whatever the item level of gear is that a specific mob or boss will drop, that will also be the item level of the conduit that boss or mob is going to drop to you. And then for PvP, as it stands at the moment, you'll be able to upgrade these things over time. So it is linked to your rating, to the amount of honor that you have, and based on that, you'll be able to upgrade. Also, I guess, based on your average item level. That's if I understand correctly what he says. I'm not a PvPer, so I really don't know. He was also asked about the Great Vault. For those of you that don't understand what that is the weekly thing that you open that is similar to the weekly chest, but now obviously it just has a lot more in it. But he was asked about the conduits and whether or not they're in the Great Vault, and the answer there is no. There is no conduits in the Great Vault. Conduits is a bonus drop from bosses, so theoretically speaking, if you finished a Mythic Plus and you open the chest at the end and there were 2 bosses inside that dungeon that had conduits that you still haven't collected, At the end of that, you open the chest, you get a piece of gear, and you get 2 conduits because you killed those bosses, and therefore you now have those 2 conduits as well. Conduits does not take up space in your loot table. They are a bonus loot, if you will, that you're just going to collect as you go along. So that's sort of a nice thing. I feel like having it be a bonus loot rather than it being like baked into it, it feels really bad because after a while, you're going to start getting conduits, and or maybe you get a lot of conduits, but you don't get any gear. That's going to start feeling really miserable. So basically, the conduits is not on the loot table with the rest of the gear. Now, that's effectively how it works. And then, of course, he was asked about raiding and raiding loot specifically and how that pertains to the Great Vault. How exactly does weapon tokens work, pieces of loot from bosses that you haven't killed yet? And in this, it's sort of a weird answer. And I would love to know exactly how that algorithm is going to function within that, how the mathematics of this is going to work. But based on what Ian explained in this interview, his answer is effectively, you will be able to get loot, it's just loot, right? You'll be able to get weapon tokens, it's just loot. It's on the loot table. So as long as you have done the raids, you should be able to get it. Now, for high tier bosses or for high end bosses and also for higher tier stuff, you won't be able to get that loot until you've killed those bosses. So effectively, based on what he's saying here, let's imagine you did full normal and you also did half of heroic that week. You'll be able to get gear from heroic there and maybe even heroic up until the second or the third last boss, even if you haven't killed it that week. As long as you have that kill under your belt, in other words, you did it in a previous week, you'll still be able to get loot from that boss because the boss is still unlocked for you as long as you've done some heroic within that week in order to unlock heroic gear for your Great Vault. That said, that excludes bosses like the end bosses. You would have to kill, say, the last 2 or 3 bosses within a raid if you wanted loot from their loot table, and the same would probably go for Mythic, where you would have to kill that week in order to make sure that you're going to get loot, or at least have the opportunity to get loot from those 3 bosses. You won't just be able to do 3 or 4 bosses in that Mythic, for Mythic that week, and then get like the end boss item. That's at least how I read his answer here. I would have to test out the Great Vault a little bit on live, once it goes live, in order to know exactly how it works, but it makes sense to me that it would work that way. Of course, for those of you that want to know how much loot a Mythic boss will drop, that is 3. He was also asked about Guildmaster loot and Master loot, and whether or not there's any plans to ever bring that back, and his answer was just no plans. In my opinion, that is the wrong answer, because again, we go back to what we discussed earlier. Designing the game based on how you want players to play rather than based on how players are actually playing. I don't see why Master Loot and Guildmaster Loot is a bad thing for the game. I think it is a net good for the game. And again, this is going to go the same route. Don't worry, guys. This is going to go the exact same route as what we had with Titan Forging, for example, where Blizzard insisted that Titan Forging and Wall Forging is great. They insisted that it's never going away. And finally they realized, well, players fucking hate it. Maybe our egos is getting in the way of us just making a change that the players ultimately do want, and that is a good thing for them. Because based on where I am, where I stand, I see no downsides to Master Loot and Guildmaster Loot existing. Especially if it is a pre-made group where people know that there's going to be Master Loot. They can make that decision based on their own, right? You don't have to hold their hand in this regard, but I'm open to suggestions. I'm open to hearing why you think in the comment section down below that's not necessarily a good thing. Next up we have, do you see armor stacking funneling as a problem with personal loot? And in this, Ian basically explains, look, it's a part of the game that exists. They are gaming the system. There's nothing that you can do about it. But it's something that they're okay with. So for those of you that don't quite understand what that means, he's talking about split runs here, or the question was about split runs, and whether or not Blizzard sees that as a problem, the way in which they're working with split runs. And they're like, well, you know, it existed before we had only personal loot, it exists now, so really, there is no way to change it. This is what players do, and again, this is where Blizzard implemented the personal loot because they didn't want people to do as many split runs. Turns out people are now doing more split runs than ever before with the whole personal loot endeavor. What did I tell you guys earlier? If you make changes based on how you want people to play, rather than based on how they play, this is the stuff that happens. People just figure out how to game the system even more. But the one thing that is true of human beings is we will always find a fucking way. That's human. He was asked about tier sets and whether they're still planned for this expansion, and he said yes, they are. So good news to everyone that was wondering about that. You will absolutely get tier sets later in this expansion, and personally, I think that is a very, very good thing. The next question was about Mythic Plus and how exactly, specifically talking about bolstering or necrotic within the Shadowlands, and if they had any plans of maybe nerfing those two things. And his quick answer here is not really. They don't think that these things should be nerfed. They do, however, they are looking at changing the behavior of some of these things. So for example, with bolstering, maybe if you have a mob with a bunch of smaller mobs around them, the smaller mobs would not contribute to bolstering. So if you kill them, they're not going to bolster this giant fucking mob to the point where it's just going to be a boss effectively at the beginning of the dungeon. So they are looking into changes to bolstering, but they're not looking to nerf it outright. They'd rather look at it targeted based on where you are. They kind of like the play around that. They like the idea of not being able to do certain things one week while fully being able to do it the next week. So personally, I don't see a problem with that. I feel like it's part of the allure of Mythic Plus is taking everything into account and then figuring out how to do it the quickest way. So I don't think it should be easier. But of course, I don't do a hell of a lot of Mythic Plus, so you can let me know in the comment section down below if you feel like it should actually be better, or why they should actually nerf it. What do you think is the reasons it should actually be nerfed? The next question, of course, came about the Maw and talking about whether or not he believes the Maw is in a better state. Now, this is a long-ass fucking answer that he gave here, and I'm going to boil it down to a couple of fundamental things. Yes, the Maw is better now than what it was when it first launched. However, Ian's reasoning behind why he thinks it's better now than what it was when it launched is actually, in my opinion, a little bit wrong. Ian sort of makes the argument that it seems like World of Warcraft players just really don't like the sandbox element that they had at the beginning of the Maw, and that's not true. The Maw was not a sandbox experiment. It wasn't sandbox. The only sandbox that was there was the fact that you didn't know what you needed to do. You just needed to run around and do it. The whole point of a proper, true sandbox experience is that I'm going into a place and my decisions are changing the physical landscape. So I'm doing things in order to see a physical change in the world around me. That is what we call sandbox MMOs, or a sandbox experience. This is not what the Maw had. In fact, the Maw had nothing to offer, and that's the problem. People didn't know exactly what we were doing in there. Now there is far more structure. You know exactly where you're going. They tell you where to go to do certain things. So I do think that as an experiment, it was fun. It was fun to see how they tried to do it. But unfortunately, Ian and Key, if you want to have a sandbox experience, you're going to have to create a sandbox zone. A zone where people can physically change things, where people can physically see the change. Be the change that you want to see in the world, effectively, is what the sandbox experience would have to be. And that was not that. They've made a bunch of changes to the Eye of the Jailer, which I think is really cool now. That Valkyr, or the fucking Morsworn, that would come to pick you up and then drop you to your death, that now has a lot less health, and you're not stunned anymore while you get picked up by it. So you can actually kill it and then drop back. But while you're in its clutches, your Eye of the Jailer debuff is actually building up very, very quickly. So you kind of want to kill it as quickly as possible to just sort of prolong your time within the Maw for a few more moments. Remember, once you get level 5 out of the Jailer, there's nothing you can do. You're going to die outright. You get a couple of minutes to leave the Maw, and that would be the time where I say leave the Maw. Because, yes, the Jailer will just straight up one-shot you. There is really no point in trying to stay beyond that. But yeah, I think the Maw is in a better position. I do agree with Ian with a lot that he had to say there. But ultimately, I do think it's going to come down to, can they continue building on it, really, is the main thing here. Is the Torghast Twisting Corridor mount intended to be mountable in the Maw? Ian did confirm that yes, once you have that mount, you will be able to mount that in the Maw. And there is another mount that actually drops from one of the mobs or the world bosses within the Maw that will also be exclusively mountable within the Maw. And I do sort of like this sort of throwback to early days Classic. I think it was Classic. I don't think it was TBC, but early days Classic in Anchorage, yes, where you had those mounts that you could ride, but only in that raid. So I do kind of like the throwback to that. The Maw is this sort of very weird, very spooky place, and there's 2 mounts right now that you can ride in there. And obviously it means that more can be added over time, which just gives you even more stuff to sort of collect and work with. On the lore side, they really only had one question for him. Will we see Nathanos return? And Ian just basically said he would not have said what he said if he wasn't going to return. So, answers for anyone that thought maybe he is perma-dead, he is not. Nathanos Blightcaller is very much alive, well, and kicking. A day in Shadowlands, this is something that you can go read for yourself. I will have a link in the description down below. If you want to know what Ian thinks a day in Shadowlands will look like, but basically just the short and the long of it. There's about 3 things that you're going to have to do once a week. Nothing in the Shadowlands is daily, right? Well, there's daily things that you can do, but as in the things that you must do, these are weekly things. There's 2 quests that you have to do for your Covenant in order to build up your renown. There is your Torghast run that you have to do for your Legendaries, and I think I'm missing one thing. Oh, the anima that you have to collect for your Covenant. Those are the only 3 things you must do every single week in order to ensure that you're up to date with everything that you're doing in the Shadowlands, with everything that your Covenant requires of you. Everything else is personal. And yes, I think there are going to be players who's really going to get lost in the beginning because Blizzard really isn't telling you anymore what to do and how. But at the same time, I feel like that's a good thing. I feel like we're going back to the days of yore, the days where you pretty much did whatever you fucking found fun and happy and healthy, and whatever you felt like doing is what you're going to be doing. So yeah, personally, I think that this is great. This is amazing. I think the Shadowlands is going to be absolutely amazing. They were talked about Shadowlands delays and working from home, and just how much the working from home thing really sort of contributed to the delay in itself. And the answer there was, yeah, quite a lot. Having to figure out how it is to work from home, how you should do it optimally, all of that took longer than what they actually thought. Also, he did explain that there's some shortcomings, some limitations to working from home that unfortunately you just can't get over. These are limitations that exist, and there's nothing you, I, or anyone else can do about it. They exist, and that's it. So you can go, once again, you can go read through that if you want. It is the last 2 portions of it, by the way. If you want to find out anything that I didn't discuss in detail. But that is the whole interview. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything that was discussed in this interview. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please remember to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and also smash that bell if you enjoy the content that I make. It does help out a ton. Then, of course, to everyone that is supporting this channel directly, the patrons, the Twitch subs, and the YouTube channel members, thank you so much for your monthly contributions. It does mean the world to me. Thanks to you guys, this channel is still growing, and it's growing stronger every single day. I quite literally wouldn't be here without you. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Guys, always my name is Acklon, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out, fam.